morning to everybody, and thank you, Dominique, for inviting me. That's not my first time in Ottawa, but it's always a great pleasure for me to be here in the best university in Ottawa, and full of a lot of friends and very curious students, fellows. I hope our discussion today, as Dominique said, is very timely. I know that many of you, especially the students, are studying foreign policy, geopolitics, and I have a daughter. She is 15 years old, and she's picking up her courses for the next 2 years, doing IB diploma, and one of her courses she picked up the global politics. And I was like looking through the curriculum, what is she going to study? And I still am very curious, because on the one side there are a lot of things that she will and probably you study, the world as it was built, especially since the Second World War, including a lot of international institutions. But I think you also are, in a kind of sense, lucky, because you're living while studying a historical time and historical moments where all of these institutions are under the huge challenge, and the challenge of existing within their previously framed scope, focus, aim. And I think you're here probably the best to start thinking about how our world, our international cooperation will need to look like in the years ahead. And that will be actually your generation who will shape, build, rebuild, or build some new way how we will all live together. So I hope today our lecture will be interesting for you. I'm really looking forward to many of the questions from your side. And probably I will start at a bit of the introduction on where we are and why our fight, Ukraine's fight, but I would say our joint fight against Russian aggression is important for you. It's important for all of us. And I'd really thank you, Dr. Dominique Kovaliv, for having me here. And, and probably I will start a bit of explaining you the nature of Russian aggression. Because actually the Russian aggression started not on February 24th, 2022. As a military aggression, it started back in 2014 when Russia occupied Ukraine's Crimea. Russia occupied eastern part of the eastern regions in Ukraine, in Donetsk and Luhansk region. And frankly, I'm not a career diplomat. And there are a few words in diplomacy which I really hate, because they have not much deep substance and not backed by many actions. And coming back to that period of time, I still remember there were a lot of deep concern, which is that word in diplomacy that is not really filled with any of the actions. And when Russian troops appeared to be in Crimea, when Russia were invading and occupying part of our territory, unfortunately, and we need to be very frank now, the reaction from the democratic community was not strong. Probably there was a fear, there was a hesitation of what to do and how to respond, and the majority of the reaction were this deep concern. And of course, there were some sanctions imposed on Russia, but the sanctions were purely, let's be frank, some formal stuff to address. But as we saw back from then until 2022, many Western companies were continuing to doing business with Russia. Russia was engaged. There were some major shifts, and actually where Canada had been a leader For example, it was Canada's Prime Minister at that time, Stephen Harper, who pushed hard on kicking Russia out of G8 and turning it into G7 group of countries. And as we are speaking today, there is a foreign ministers G7 meeting here in Canada, in Quebec. So historically, there were some steps, but whether they were enough, definitely no. And I think the other thing what we wanted to explain, and we were trying to explain back then to many of our partners, that look, Russia will not stop. Russia will not stop occupying Crimea. Russia won't stop occupying the eastern regions of Ukraine, because the nature of Russian, agenda is they don't want to have a democratic, prosperous Ukraine, which is the member of EU, and Ukraine, which is the member of NATO, as their neighbor, as they're on their borders. There are many of the, we can speculate many explanations of that, but there are a few of them I can share on my side. First, prosperous and democratic Ukraine is a big challenge to Russia itself. On the one side, it's really the biggest country in the world in terms of the territory, but its economy is smaller than Canadian economy, although their population is much bigger. It's a very weak economy. Let's be frank, the majority of Russian economy is based on the export of fuels, mainly oil and gas, as it was once named a big diesel station of the world. Its economy is actually very inefficient. Look on the diversity of those small number of very rich people, which specifically are called Russian oligarchs, but because majority of them really got their fortune not being entrepreneurs, but more being close to Putin and his regime, and based on the access to the resources. And the majority of population is living very poor. They don't have the freedom rights. They don't have, the freedom of speech, and many things we all take for granted. So for Russia, having this prosperous Ukraine, Western-oriented Ukraine as a neighbor is the threat to Putin regime, because that will send a signal to Russian people that, the Western bloc and democracy can bring prosperity, can bring a good level of life for the people. The second thing is just, Russia, the end game of Russia was to erase Ukraine as an independent country and to restore in some way this Russian empire, because Ukraine is where it all started. So Kyiv was actually the cradle of the Kyiv Rus, and the history of development of the region is coming from Kyiv. Back in 1998, Kyiv was the city which first brought Christianity to the region. And at that time, there was no Moscow, there was no St. Petersburg, there were some forests and no civilization at that time. And Russia still cannot live with that. They were, for centuries and decades, they were trying to erase Ukrainian culture, Ukrainian people, Ukrainian, all the intelligence. So from the history, we know that when Ukraine was rising in their aspiration to get the independence, usually either people have been in prison, sent to Siberia, or they orchestrated artificial famine in Ukraine, Holodomor in 1932, 1933, or they just, physically killed all the professors, all the artists. So what Russia was trying to do for the decades, just erasing our cultural identity, national identity. And actually historically, Canada, and especially our big Ukrainian community in Canada and in US, played a big role for building the independent Ukraine, because the community, and I see here some of the people from our community, you were most vocal in the Western Hemisphere advocating for Ukraine's independence. And actually, Canada became the first country in the Western Hemisphere to recognize Ukraine as an independent country back in 1991. So you played a lot then, and Canada is doing a lot now to help us to fight for our country, for sovereignty, and for independence. Let's be clear, Russia has the same goal now. So when they were planning, the full-scale invasion, they wanted to get control over Kyiv. And they believe that in a few days they will be welcomed in Kyiv, and they will get control over Ukraine, which of course they failed. So looking back for these 3 years of the full-scale invasion, frankly, we need to acknowledge that strategically we already won, because that's they never get control over Ukraine, and the resilience and the unity of Ukrainian people resisting and stating strong against Russian aggression was something probably nobody was expecting from us. Because if we were meeting with you like 3.5 years ago, you would probably be sitting here and evaluating that Ukraine will fall down in weeks or in days, and we are now in 3 years, and we continue to fight, and the level of unity, the level of resistance in Ukraine, is historically high, and the level of rebirth of Ukrainian culture, Ukrainian identity, it's flourishing now, because this is a huge sense of national identity, which is now felt deeply in Ukraine. Of course, if we are looking on this, Russian goal to erase Ukraine as a country, there is one specific aspect of it, and one of the most horrific crimes that Russia has been committing is deporting Ukrainian children. And why I'm specifically emphasizing on this, because children is the future of each country. This is the new generation who will build the country, who will become the very active citizens. And by, forcefully deporting over 19,000 of Ukrainian children, that is actually a crime not only against the most vulnerable, group in our society, because children are unprotected, they are minors, that's why, we all in our countries have a lot of regulation to protect children's rights, but taking them not only like physically deporting them, but also what we see what Russia is doing from illegal passportization to like imposing and pushing the children like to learn Russian language, to erase like their Ukrainian identity, to be even like using like them by sending them to military training camps for boys who are like 16, 17-year-old for future, imagine, to send them to the front lines, actually fighting with their own citizens, with their former friends, and so on. This is one of the most horrific crimes if you see it from the perspective of the future of the country and the future of the nation. And that's why it is one of the most important priority of us as the government is to bring the children back. And here again, Canada is playing an important role, because together with Canada, we are co-leading the international coalition of working on bringing back Ukrainian children. And we have over 40 countries now who are members of this coalition. And back last year in October, there was a big conference here in Montreal, specifically discussing the ways how we can help to bring back those children. And while talking about bringing back the children, it's like first we need all to understand where they are, because Russia is big and they are not reporting, they are not allowing even the Red Cross, the UNICEF, and the other international institutions to track. This is the first important thing. Then how we need and how like the other countries can step in and help to bring these children back. How it's like technically is possible. We agreed to have some kind of safe havens where the children can be, safely transferred from Russia to the safe havens, got all their documents, and then bringing back. And the fourth point is their rehabilitation, because many of them, what they report, they are going through hell. So there is a needs of a big support. And here there is my colleague, Ambassador of Estonia, and Estonia is helping a lot in this track. The other question that you would probably ask, why should you all care? This is a different continent, and why it's important for not only us, not only Europe, but it's important to the whole world. And the first and the most answer is because what Russia did is just try to forcefully redraw the borders of the sovereign country by tanks and missiles and artillery. And if we look on the world that we were living since the Second World War, it was built on the idea that whenever the country is big in territory or small in territory, whether it's a strong military power or not strong military power, whether it's a prosperous country or it's a developing country, the only way how we all can live together and the governments of each and every country can focus their efforts on the well-being of their citizens is just that the borders of the sovereign countries are respected. If this rule in the world will not be in place anymore, what will be the consequences? First, what will be the priority to protect the country? That will be military. Yeah? What it will lead to, shifting a lot of focus from social programs, from economic prosperity, to actually building strong military, because this will be the only way how the countries can build this deterrence, whether in the alliances like NATO or by themselves. This is the first thing. The second thing, like if you look on what's happening now on the front line, Ukraine actually directly or indirectly is fighting with 3 nuclear powers. It's 2.5 nuclear, with at least 2 nuclear powers, which is Russia and which is North Korea, because the North Korean troops are already deployed on the front line together with Russians fighting against Ukrainian army. So what could it mean for the broader nuclear weapons? It will also mean that the countries will try to find a way to build these deterrence packages for themselves by deploying or increasing their nuclear weapons. So it will be vice versa, meaning that the world was working on nuclear non-proliferation for many years, but now, and you can already see this shift with the discussion in the EU, which France already started several actually days ago, about the potential kind of a nuclear umbrella for some of the European countries. It's already starting. So the countries are more and more understanding that this could be, one way of building this deterrence. And are we sure that this world and many of the countries will have enough, levels of protection against using these weapons? That's a big question. The third thing is that we're living in the world where the resources are freely traded or almost freely traded, as we see within the last few weeks. But we are living in a globalized world. And we saw, especially back in 2022, how Russian full-scale invasion already was influencing the global economy and the global trade. We still remember the highest record in the last 50 years food prices. when Russia blocked Ukrainian seaports. We still remember the huge hybrid war that Russia was trying to launch using the energy leverage on the European countries. We still remember the highest ever, like within the decade, energy prices, which had an impact in many countries, including Canada, causing additional price hike and inflation, that's other link that already had the impact far beyond Ukraine. It's also attacking the global stability. And while talking about just the concept that Russia, on the one side, it's sitting in the, as a nuclear power, it's sitting in the Security Council within the United Nations, the body that was designed to prevent wars, and now it's like using its veto right. Russia is waging this war. It's also the signal which is sent to many other authoritarian regimes. So that's, you can do it and there will be not so much response. So that's why it is important, to understand the global implications that can be, that can occur in different other parts of the world if that will be normalized. Because we can't, build a world where the violence, where the cruelty, whether the war crimes, and just the overall concept that breaching the other countries' sovereign borders will be normalized. Because then the world will turn upside down, and instead of, focusing on climate change and social problems, we all will be focusing on defense, military, and how to protect the borders. There is one other thing, I probably wanted to share with my 3 years experience in Canada. And the overall change of the views that happening, I hope, here in many capitals, especially in Europe. When I came first to Canada, it was like exactly 3 years ago. And I was meeting here with a lot of experts, with professors here. And I was saying them like, look, Ukraine will fight, we will not fall down, and we just need support. And I was shocked, to be very frank, hearing from many of the people the fear of Russia. There was this concept of post-Cold War, that Russia is still, the people were telling me, like, ambassador, it's like nuclear power, it's the member of Security Council, it's the big country, it's the second biggest army in the world, the strongest army in the world. And look where we are now. Was it 3 years? Like, second biggest army in the world is like a big questionable thing, because, was this so strong army is losing thousands and thousands of their troops probably to try to get some small village, which is itself proves that we were right, saying like, you are all overestimating Russia. And I think there was a big fear in the eyes of many of the experts that time just to talk about Russia itself. And I think it's important now to realize that the concept of towards this 20 or even 30 years dealing with Russia was wrong. And I will be very blunt. Yes, it was wrong, because the whole idea was to try to build relations with Russia, like trading with them, investing in them, opening markets, opening borders. And maybe at some point of time, Russia will become a democratic country and we can build their democracy and so on. You see where this policy went. And I think, frankly, Canadian business and Canada was the most cautious believing in all of these policies, because we saw back in 2022 when the real sanctions started to come, Canadian business among all G7 suffers the least, because they understood that they want to don't want to work in such an environment, and they were like, divesting from Russia far beyond the 2022. And I think that this concept itself need to be redesigned, because Russia is not only our neighbor, and for us, as we are looking for the lasting, lasting peace, we are very realistic. The key point of our approach to the longer lasting peace is how to build a deterrence and how to ensure that Russia would never start any war, any invasion against us again. But also, I think for Canada, it's an important, to understand it, because Russia is also your neighbor in Arctics. And I think not many people realize it. And I got, some months ago, I was asked with some of the, I would say the people who still doubt in whether we need to support Ukraine or no. I just said, that there is this movie that was produced in 2020, end of 2021, which is called Don't Look Up. So I said, you need to look up. Because in terms of biosecurity threats, that's Russia is now the biggest security threat to NATO, and you have a very direct, neighborhood with them, and they are not good neighbors. Trust us, and you can see what they've done in Ukraine. So, building security and understanding, Russia is important, but what I mean understanding Russia and understanding how hostile they are, how ideologic they are, it's a matter of also, I think, in national security for Canada now. And with your new and updated defense policy, it's highly now focused on security in Arctics, and that security means building deterrence against Russia. So, frankly speaking, we are also fighting now to help you to get the time to prepare your defense in Arctics. What also the last thing, what I would say is important is also the reality that for many years, many Western countries undermined security and defense. And it's now already the time not only to realize this, but to make the actions. And we see it happening a lot in Europe. We see many European countries stepping in, and today 2% of GDP spending for defense and security, it's not a wishful goal. It's already something that many of the countries passed as a goal, but they are talking about 3%, they are talking about 4%, some of them are reaching 4% in defense, because this is now the reality of the world. And today it couldn't be neglected, because in a current situation, it's about the collective defense, but this collective defense works even when each of the member of this collective defense institutions, like, for example, NATO, is delivering. And with that in mind, I would say it's not only about committing some money in the budget. It's not enough. That's were done back from 2022. But it also means that there need to be a close cooperation with defense industry, because you can put in your budget huge money. If your industry is not ready, and if you don't plan years ahead, if you don't work with them in order them to quickly ramp up, you just will be not able to spend and to build this capacity. But if you look on that, and I think this is a lot shifting now, especially in Europe, many of the countries and companies are not looking on that just purely from the military perspective. Because when you're telling that you're investing money for like defense, many people perceive it like it's something theoretical. Yes, you have some military base in the middle of somewhere, you just need few things, nobody see them. But it's also a huge industrial policy. Because in order to build this equipment, you have a lot of jobs created. You have a lot of innovations in technology. Look what's happening today on the battlefield. We are not in a traditional way of warfare. So if we will take many of the, NATO war doctrines, it's not relevant anymore. Today, the war is becoming more technological and frankly cheaper, because the one FPV drone that costs $1,500 can easily destroy the tank that costs $20 million. We have, for example, some cases where 40 kilometers of the front line are kept and secured only by drones. This whole new technology, whatever we are talking about, the small drones, FPV drones, or the big drones like the size of the small Cessna plane that can fly 2,000 kilometers, it's totally new approach to the warfare. And if we look on what, for example, North Korea is getting while joining Russia on the front line, they are not sending their troops with their goodwill. They have a key goal to get the experience of the new type of the warfare where all of the new technology is being used, and to bring back this experience home. And imagine there are now only two countries, which is Ukraine and Russia, who have this experience. None of the NATO country has this experience.
I've been listening intently and keeping an eye on social media, not because I'm an addict, but because I was expecting some breaking news from Moscow, actually. Since today, Trump's special envoy to Russia, Steve Witkoff, was supposed to meet with President Putin. Now it's past 8 o'clock in Moscow. It's not clear if he has met Witkoff yet or not, but Putin just made a declaration regarding the proposal by the United States that was accepted by Ukraine on Tuesday in Saudi Arabia about the unconditional 30-day ceasefire. So this is what Putin just declared. He said, yes, he's in favor of a 30-day ceasefire, but, of course we expected the but. We want guarantees that during the 30-day ceasefire, Ukraine won't hold mobilization, won't train troops, and won't receive weapons. So I would like to have your fresh reaction to this proposal. He said other things too about Kursk and so forth, but that seems to be the key.
Look, it's a very dynamic time when we are living. If you look on the news within the last 2.5 weeks, it were like roller coaster. But I think it's very clear, and that we made it very clear as Ukraine that we want peace. As nobody else, we want peace. That was not Ukraine who invaded. That was not Ukraine who started this war. Of course, we answer. If we are attacked, we mobilize our people. But I think it was very important, this discussion 2 days ago in Jeddah, where we accepted the U.S. proposal, unconditional. The proposal was an unconditional 30-day ceasefire and the immediate start of the peace talks, because the core important path to peace, and I would say I would put it into few main aspects. First, it's important for us in this peace talks to ensure that this peace will be lasting. Why it's important for us and what we have been explaining a lot to all of our partners is like we had the history of Russia breaching so many different commitments and agreements. Let's start from Budapest Memorandum. Ukraine back then had the third biggest nuclear weapon stock in the world.
In 1994.
In 1994, yes. So we refused that time. Now there are a lot of people in Ukraine raising the voices that it was a huge mistake, but we refused that. But we got the assurance from countries, including Russia, that Ukraine's sovereignty, territorial integrity, and independence will not be challenged. We see now, I think that there was even we even formally reached to all of the countries who signed Budapest Memorandum and said, like, you see what's happening, like what's we should do, how we should treat this agreement. The second thing, if we look back, it's the Minsk process, which started after Russia occupied Crimea and Donetsk and Luhansk region. Look, we had at that time over 200 different levels of negotiations with Russians. We had several times ceasefire, which Russia was breaching every time. We had the leadership meeting and discussion with the Normandy format twice.
2014.
In 2014, and then in Normandy format even back in 2019. So there were two different presidents, like both Poroshenko and Zelensky, who participated in this Normandy format, where there was even discussions about the ceasefire, which Russia once again breached. So then there was even like the new one back in 2022. We negotiated Ukraine with UN and Turkey, and then Russia with Turkey and UN. We negotiated so-called Istanbul Agreement, which allowed to the ships like a free navigation of the Black Sea for the grain corridor. What Russia did with that? Breached. Yeah, and even yesterday they fired once again a missile into the ship full of grain, which was supposed to go to Algeria. So just the reality is that we are now experienced enough how Russia is breaching the agreement. So while talking about the long and lasting peace, the core issue for us is how we will ensure that it won't happen again. Of course, the most cheap and straightforward, I think, easier way, if there was a political will, it would be NATO membership. But we understand that there are the countries who oppose at this point of time and who have been frankly opposing for the last several years Ukraine's NATO membership. So that's, okay, what's then another alternative? It's continuing to support Ukraine in terms of the military capability, continuing to support in terms of weapons, because we need them to have a deterrence package, so that Russia won't be, it will become very costly for them to attack again. And the ors, we are open to other kind of the discussions, and I think now there is also the discussion of how to ensure the long and lasting peace, and there is the so-called the coalition of willing, and I think there are up to 34 countries, and there are active discussions of even potentially sending in a different level involvement, but the troops in Ukraine after the ceasefire to ensure this long and lasting peace. But let's be also frank, the contact line, the front line is over 1,500 kilometers. If you would calculate seriously how many troops you need to ensure the whole front line, the reality is none of you have physically that kind of the forces. So this will be the core discussion. I still, like, as you read, it will be interesting to see the other partners' reaction on these conditions.
Thank you. I think we will open it right away to discussion. Who wants to have the first question? Maybe I'll go with the Ukrainian club.
Sure. Thank you. We have two mics. That's good.
Katerina Kuzmenko from the Ukrainian Students Club. Madam Ambassador, I had a question. Could we please focus our discussion a little bit on what does Canada and our Nordic partners in Europe need to know about Arctic security, about Ukraine, about our strategies and what we've learned to apply in NATO and for security and defense? Thank you.
I think, if you look now on the way of support, especially in the Nordic and Baltic countries, they are now on the front line and the front voice. And what's really I really admire from Nordic countries, they are talking less, doing more. They are always on the far front of, and as an example in terms of support to Ukraine, whether it's the Danish model, which actually the government of Denmark built together, understanding that on one side we have a big capacity of our defense, but we don't have enough money. And coming back to NATO, I still remember back in 2019, there were people who were saying that Ukraine need to go this path of Finlandization. At that time, like staying neutral, but now Finland is the NATO member, so I say yes, we will follow that path. But they are the example. They are the example of how to deliver. Really, in Canada, I think it's like Canada is among top 6 countries in terms of the overall support. If you look on the structure of the support, it's more kind of financial support in the form of loans. So majority of that support which came from Canada to Ukraine, it was the borrowing. So Canadian government provided the loans to Ukrainian government. Just one part of that Ukraine got today. It's the 2.5 billion Canadian dollars backed by the revenues from Russian frozen assets. And in terms of the military support, I think there is more that we could do together. And I'm happy that we already have several Canadian companies who are starting their joint production with their Ukrainian counterparts, because definitely we believe it's a win-win for both countries if we can put together companies. And as I've said, speaking about defense, keeping in mind that this is a huge manufacturing base. This is a huge source of technology, innovations. And just remember the history from the Second World War. The companies who now produce all the electronic equipments were those who started with production of tanks. So like this is the mindset that we need to keep.
Thank you very much, Madam Ambassador. You're giving us a very good insight into the situation, and I fully appreciate how important the military considerations are. But I'd like to revert to your first point, which was the children. In Canada, we unfortunately have a long history of the negative effects of taking children away from their cultures and their families and seeking to indoctrinate them into another culture. We have this both with the long history of our Indigenous people. We also did the same with the Doukhobors in British Columbia. And I think this is perhaps getting a little bit lost, particularly in the current climate, which is very fraught and in which we're having tensions between the US and Canada as well and all the rest of it. Is there a possibility of making more of a public issue of the children being taken away. You say there is an association of nations involved. There is some kind of movement on this, but having conferences is one thing and getting the publicity out is another, because it seems to me that this may be an issue to which Canadians could be very sensitive if it were more well known.
The longer the small children who were like 1, 2, 3-year-old when they were forcefully transferred to Russia, they are growing up. And unfortunately, the way of our nature works, the longer they are there, there is a greater chance that they just will forget, their identity. They will forget and they will be brainwashed. So it is a pressing issue to do the actions. And I think, I'm really grateful for those countries, especially Qatar, who is helping and working as an intermediary to help to bring children back. Canada is supporting a lot of activities to help the rehabilitation. Estonia and the other countries are helping in terms of this, to develop this safe havens. And we have managed to return back over a bit over more than 1,000 children. And this is the thing we are focused on.
There are many moving parts as the Western Alliance begins to fracture with the instability in the White House planning. I'm concerned about the reports of White House drawing up plans for Russian sanctions relief. So this puts Ukraine in a difficult situation because they want to not offend the United States any further, but at the same time they can't afford to have this kind of thing. So I'm just wondering how does Ukraine deal with this destructive tension between, one hopes the Europeans will maintain the sanctions, if not increase them, while the White House actively considers releasing them. And as we just heard the conditions today that Putin has pushed on the table, there's a strong possibility that Trump will say, yeah, I'm okay with that. So I was just wondering if you could comment on how does Ukraine handle this destructive tension?
So in terms of the sanctions, what Russia was trying to persuade everybody was the narrative that sanctions are not working. Because that was the way how they were trying to say, like, oh, no, you can impose whatever you do, sanctions does not matter. In reality, it matters a lot for them. You can easily track it with the number of accidents with the airplanes and the number of times where their airplanes were not able to actually be taken into the air because something is not working. For Russia, it's a huge thing. The same is for oil and gas. Of course, they built this shadow fleet, but let's be also clear on sanctions. The problem of them is their enforcement. We still have reports of numerous Western spare parts and technology that we find in Russian missiles, Russian drones, and even Iranian drones. I really want to acknowledge that Canada had done a lot on this. There were some Canadian spare parts back in 2022. Now, for the last probably more than a year, there was no report that there is any Canadian spare parts in Russian technology. So if there is a will, the governments can do a lot, and I really appreciate what the Canadian government done with this. Whether the other allies done the same, frankly, I will tell you no. There's still sanctions circumventions. It's a good and bad. The good thing of that is that we understand Russia cannot substitute it. The bad thing, it still could be done, meaning that there were these loopholes. And of course, we believe that, sanctions is important pressure on Russia, because at this point of time, we don't see a lot of Russia goodwill to negotiate in a good manner the long and lasting peace. So that's why it's important. But also look on a different angle on sanctions. If you were a business, if you were a big strategic investor, with all that Russia did to Ukraine, with their own citizens, like poisoning them in London, killing the opposition, and like the reality of Putin's regime as we see it, especially within the last 3-4 years, will you really be ready once again to put your capital in Russia? And whether your investors or the money which you operate will be easily, allocated back there after many of those companies fixed huge losses when they were, divesting from Russian markets. They're also an interesting question. And that will be also the question for them in terms of their taking risk, their integrity, and what the companies usually try to put in their website, how good they are in terms of their values. So it's a good test of that. And we see now that, and you see it now in Canada as well, how much now the public perception of the values which business stands matters to their customers. So I'm really I don't believe that a lot of private capital would flow back to Putin's regime in Russia, just purely taking into account very pragmatic approach, because they don't have any guarantees. The regime is still the same. So like everybody, treating Russia, we as Ukraine, as their neighbor, we are talking about long-term security guarantees because we don't trust Russia. And I think business, actually, many of those companies don't trust Putin regime.
Thank you. We'll take one last question. That'll be you. You've been very patient, and while the mic is coming your way, let me give you another update. The statement by Putin was made before his meeting with the U.S. Special Envoy Steve Witkoff. So it's going to be a late evening. He sets his conditions before meeting the American envoy. So that's good to know. Your
Yes.
question.
Hi, my name is Artem Sudarkin. I'm a student from Ukrainian Student Club, and I have a question. So, as you know, after the start of the war, many Western companies have left Russia. And the question is, what Ukraine could do to make our investment climate more attractive to the Western countries, and what Ukraine can do to attract companies to come to Ukraine, start their headquarters, and become the leading region for those Western companies, and how we can make Ukraine just overall more attractive to Western businesses. Thank you.
There are three important things. First, in terms of doing business in Ukraine post-war, the change between Ukraine pre-war and the post-war will be that Ukraine is already a candidate to EU membership, meaning for a lot of businesses, the regulation itself and the path to full EU membership, which we believe will be in coming short period of time. We are doing a lot on our side. So in terms of the regulation and the business climate, we're still not in EU. So it means like some process of giving all these licenses will be still shorter, but we are becoming closer to EU in terms of the all regulations, which is something familiar to business. Plus, the second thing, it's a huge market, meaning that the demand for recovery is so big that there is a room for everybody. But of course, there is the third thing, is that still the companies depending on what at the end of the negotiations will be the security guarantees, that will be an important pillar for this business decisions. And that's what we are explaining to all of our partners, that security guarantees for Ukraine is not only guarantees physically for security, but it's also an important enabler for the future private capital flow to Ukraine in the rebuilding process. Because without the security guarantees, the companies in the private sector and the private capital will hesitate, because the question for them will be, okay, will it repeat in 5 years? So what's then the point for us to invest billions of dollars in the country? But there is fourth thing, which is as much important as the others. It's also that for countries like Canada, it's also the diversification, because this is a new market which will absorb a lot. It's like a Marshall Plan after the Second World War. But the other thing is that these companies need a bit of support. We see that the governments like France, UK, Germany, Poland, the governments itself establish and engage with their business in their participation in Ukraine's rebuilding. They are providing them export finances, grants, concessional funding, or like war risk insurance, which is not happening in Canada. And frankly speaking, there is not so much support for Canadian companies who wants to participate. So the most of the recent kind of engagement with the business, they are done purely kind of on a commercial basis, which of course reflects, the price, because, you usually price the risk. But the great example that we had back last year, we signed a 10-year contract with Canadian company Cameco, and now Cameco supplies actually all uranium that is used to produce fuel or to all Ukraine's nuclear power stations. So actually Canada just substituted Russia in this market, which is a great example. But that is a purely commercial contract between two companies. There is an interest. As I've said, one of the defense company just established the JV with Ukrainian company, purely commercial. There is still not available these instruments of support of Canadian business. And I frankly think it's the right time to do it, because you want to diversify your trade. We could be a big market. And there is this puzzle that is lacking, is that instruments of support. And now it's like, as you call it, the ball is on Canada's side. To help their businesses to trade with Ukraine, to invest in Ukraine, and to make these joint ventures. I'm advocating on this since day two as I've arrived to Canada.
So I just want to thank you on behalf of the faculty for having come and spent some time with us today. I unfortunately missed the first half hour, but it has been so interesting for me, and I mean, you've had an absolutely riveted audience. The fact that you've been able to share what you are living, what you're thinking about with our community, I believe that also has so much impact. So thank you very much, and I hope that you will be back again.